Have you ever heard never make the first offer? Should you? Are you sure? You've heard it. Maybe they've trained you on it. Hey, there's a why and a when you should make that first offer. If you're sitting there waiting silently, awkwardly, waiting for the first offer, it could be cost you money. But making the first offer usually gets you better terms. So let's get into the science. Let's get into the art. Let's do it.
Maximize your influence. Kurt Mortensen is the author of Persuasion IQ, Laws of Charisma, and the best-selling book, Maximum Influence.
Welcome to podcast 607. This is Maximize Your Influence. Kurt Mortensen here. Glad to have you here. Glad you're back. Tell your family, friends, and enemies about the podcast. Can be found at Spotify, iTunes, Audible, and YouTube. Little housekeeping. Take your Persuasion IQ at MaximizeYourInfluence.com. That's also the spot for the advanced training. We'll put a link in the description below. But today we're going to talk about first offer and negotiation. Too many times it gets too awkward because neither side wants to make that first offer. So be proactive, make the first offer. Let me tell you how, when, and where. Because the research is clear. The party who anchors it with the first offer secures better results. So we're going to be talking about that first offer, anchoring, sometimes called opening offer bias. But before we do, let's get into that persuasion blunder.
Don't!
So I was listening to a representative of a software company, kind of a SaaS company, if you're familiar with that model. One of the fun things I get to do is to listen to these presentations and critique them on the back end. Because that's where the real learning takes place, because you can listen to yourself doing it and make the adjustments and hear the critiques. So this is a high-end software, and the person, of course, wasn't being too pushy, and that's always a good thing. You want to push a little bit. I mean, there's a fine line between persistence and being a pain in the butt, and they were probably on the other side not persistent enough. And here came the objection. Here came the excuse. Oh, I've got to take this to my committee. I've got to take this to my group. This is what I need to do. Let me get back to you. And that's where it sat. And of course, I'll put money on they never heard from that person again. Now, first of all, 67% of the time, that's a lie. When people say it's too expensive, can't afford it, send me more information, talk to fill in the blank, it's usually a lie. But again, sometimes people do have to take it to a committee. They do have to think about it. Now, the first thing here, if someone says they need to think about it, you should probably say, great, validate the objection, and then say, what exactly do you need to think about? What that enables you to do is to find out, is this a true objection or a knee-jerk objection? When they say, I need to think about everything, probably not. But when they say certain specific things, then you know exactly what they're thinking about. Now, back to this presentation I was monitoring and critiquing. Let me get back to you later. Of course, that could be valid, but let me just put it out to you there. Let's assume this is valid. They have to take it to committee. They have to talk to a partner. Let's assume that's valid. Just remember, and here's the blunder, never let someone else persuade for you. Never let someone else sell for you. Never let someone else negotiate for you, especially if they're not an expert in your field and your product or service. Because they're going to get into a committee, into a group. There's going to be a few questions. They're going to take your hour-long presentation and crystallize it into 30 to 60 seconds, which is not going to give it justice. And it's not going to sound very good because you let somebody else persuade for you. Never let that happen. If someone's going to take it to a committee, if someone's going to take it to a partner, a couple things need to happen here. First of all, see if you can be in that meeting. That's the first thing. Be on the phone, be on the Zoom call, whatever it is, make sure you're there if you can. If not, be there to follow up with any questions that they have or available on phone. Set that time aside, or at least prep them to persuade for you with some frequently asked questions, with some things that they're going to hear, with objections they're going to get they haven't even thought of. Prep them for that presentation. Any one of those will do, but just don't let them persuade for you. Be there if you can, available on the phone if you can, or prep them if you can, or all of the above. Whatever you need to do, make sure you don't fall into that trap, to that blunder, to let someone else persuade for you, because they're going to take that hour, beautiful presentation you gave that answered all their questions and solved their objections, and it's just going to hit a brick wall because they're just not used to it and they don't know how to answer the questions or objections. So that is our blunder of the week. Which brings us to listener email.
Oh boy!
and the geeky article. 2 sounds in a row because the geeky article comes from Martin from Connecticut. Every once in a while, we'll take a geeky article that others have found and we'll critique it. Usually it's a long list of do's and don'ts, and some are good and some are not so good. We'll go through that. Martin, who's from Connecticut, says he used to work in New York City. Now he's doing more of the online things. He says, I'm loving the laws of charisma, audios, and ways to connect and build rapport. And I loved how you talked about a few weeks ago the opposite, how we're creating resistance. I found this article and wanted your insights on the 14 habits of the most likable people. Thanks, Martin. Thanks for the kudos on the laws of charisma. Those are also available at maximizeyourinfluence.com. So this is titled The 14 Habits of Most Likable People. And of course, we'll link it on the website, Maximize Your Influence. So this is from businessinsider.com, Richard Filoni, Napoleon Hill. Of course, you know that name from Think and Grow Rich. So let's go through them, and I'll let you know what I think. We learned a few things from this. First one, a lot of this is taken from Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. If you haven't read that, you're not taking your life or career very seriously, because Napoleon Hill, if you don't know, interviewed successful people, millionaires, to find out what they're thinking and doing. It's different than the average person. If you don't know this, success is an old book test. He provides a lot of the answers, and it's pretty simple. You want to be successful, you want to be a millionaire, you start thinking, acting, and doing what other millionaires do. First one is develop a pleasing personality. He also called it $1 million personality. He talked about Charles Schwab pleasing personality, how you get anybody just because of that personality to do anything. Oh, great. Pleasing personality does make you more likable, and people will go out of your way to help you and be persuaded by you. There is a direct correlation between likability and your ability to persuade others. Next one. They develop a positive mental attitude and let it be seen and felt by others. But hey, we love a good mental attitude. Attitude does come from our expectations, so we expect things to eventually work out. That's part of our optimism. And people don't want that cynic. They don't want that negative person. They don't like that person to suck the life out of them. I agree that with someone that's positive, that has a good reputation. The key thing I like about this is to be seen in your day-to-day actions by others and to be felt by others. How about this one? They always speak in carefully disciplined, friendly tone. Well, it's true. A pleasing sound, a friendly tone, being able to speak in front of an audience, not alienating people with your voice, true. But I think there's a time to inflect down, a more serious tone, to be the expert, to where you need to tell people what they need to do. Because when you're accepted as the expert, there's very little persuasion resistance. So I'm going to say, sometimes, not all the time. Because sometimes you need to have that serious tone, the right tonality, that expert tone in your voice where people know you're the expert. You're telling them what to do. Again, when they accept you as the expert, there's very little resistance. So I'll say, okay, sometimes on that one. Next one, they pay close attention to someone speaking to them. Well, this is true. Great persuaders are great listeners. They ask 3 times more questions. They come across as a consultant more than a salesperson. This is true. And the reality is, if you learn to do those things, they'll tell you everything you need to know to persuade them. We are talking way too much. That's a big complaint. We tend to vomit on people, so that one's absolutely true. How about this one? They're able to maintain their composure in all circumstances. Well, that's true when people overreact, or I'll add unpredictable, or give a poor first impression. Yeah, people are going to remember that, so you got to be very careful with how you act, how you treat other people. I mean, there's a time and place to get angry in a certain situation, but you have to take a look at the circumstance and how you react to that. So most of the time on that one. The next one is they are patient. Talk about the proper timing of your words, your acts, your deeds give you a big advantage over impatient people. I don't know. I've met a lot of successful people that aren't very patient. They follow the motto, ready, fire, aim. Okay, they just run and they do it. They're not prepared, but they get it done. But at least they've done it. Where a lot of people wait till all their ducks in a row and they never do anything. So there's kind of a happy medium there. So I don't think they're always patient. It's a good thing to be patient, to approach people at the right time, to persuade people at the right time. So I'll say most of the time on that one. Next one is they talk about they keep an open mind. It says those who close themselves off from certain ideas and only associate with like-minded people are missing out on personal growth, but they're not advancing in their careers. I'll agree on that angle on that. As truly influential people and leaders, we need to get along with every personality, every culture, every age group, every department. Even if people do have different beliefs, to have an open mind, say, all right, they believe. Why, put yourself in their shoes. Why do they believe that way? Why do they think that way? We're getting to the point in society where if someone believes something differently politically, or something about society, or even religion, they turn them off, they're wrong, they're bad, they're evil, and we don't talk to them. So I'm going to say yes on that one. Definitely keep an open mind. Because until you get yourself in their shoes and really understand them, you're going to have a hard time trying to persuade them. How about this one? They smile when speaking with others. Napoleon Hill talks about Franklin D. Roosevelt's greatest asset was his $1 million smile, which allowed people to lower their guards in their conversation. Hey, smile does work over the phone. A smile is contagious face-to-face. A smile does increase sales in retail by 20%. But we got to be careful by culture, the situation, the gender. There's so many different things here. So usually a smile, but we got to be careful when we use a smile because some people have those cheesy, I need to run smiles or hide your children type smiles. We'll just leave it at that. I know I've been diagnosed with RBF. You don't know what that is. Look that one up. We've talked about that one. So I have the opposite challenge. And so I'll say most of the time there. The other one they talked about is they know that not all their thoughts need to be expressed. Probably true. You're probably going to offend a lot of people if everyone knew what you're thinking and feeling. That's the challenge. We add to that too, especially a great listening skill. One of the reasons we're such poor listeners, we're thinking what to say next, what to do next. And a lot of times we cut people off. We don't listen. So if you have a thought you think it needs to be expressed, write it down. That gives you a chance to just kind of let it go, keep listening, and then express it when the time is right. Here's one. They don't procrastinate. That it is a form of fear. People are afraid of taking action. Although some success studies talk about procrastination, that there are certain things we should procrastinate and put off. And there's some things maybe we don't even want to touch. And so there's a time and place. So I'll say most of the time on that one. Here's an interesting one. They engage in at least one good deed a day. Well, I'll go with that. That's networking. That's building relationship. That's understanding reciprocity. That's just the right thing to do. Just doing one nice thing, one good deed. I'll add a compliment, something every day. It helps you more than it helps the person. It really does. It just changes the game a little bit. Plus, you got the reciprocity factor, getting right thing to do, and it builds a relationship. Next one we've talked about, one of the laws of persuasion, is they praise others in a genuine way without being excessive. I call it the law of esteem. He says, it's a good trait, but don't rub it on too thickly, Napoleon Hill says, and there's truth to that. But we know, studies even show, even though you're putting it on thick, people still like it. It still feels good. It's called ingratiation. Ingratiators do get more promotions. They do make more money. I'm not saying do that. Be sincere, be genuine, and don't do it in an excessive way. But I'm telling you, with the law of esteem, when you boost someone's esteem through praise, it opens the doors to influence. You bruise it through a better story, through making somebody feel bad, whatever it is, it shuts the doors to influence. And final one, they have someone they trust to point out their flaws. So Napoleon Hill says to have a confidant who can be completely honest with them allows them to continue growing that personal development. And that's true. We still have a mastermind team, someone that's going to be honest with a presentation or your attempt to influence, like yes, good, lame, bad, good, bad, whatever it is, where they can critique you in a way where you're learning, you're growing from it. Because no one gives a perfect presentation, but we can't coach ourselves. We know the greatest athletes in the world, they needed a coach because what you think you're doing right or wrong is very different. Guarantee you what you're doing right or wrong. When I do seminars on the perfect persuasive presentation and I have somebody do a video, before we watch it, remember this is called the woebegone or self-perception bias, the woebegone effect, that when I have people rate themselves, they're either way too high or way too low. No one pegs themselves right where they're at. They just can't. We just perceive ourselves the wrong way. We're either way too high or way too low. Usually way too high. So take a deep breath and kind of figure out somebody that can steer you in the right direction and coach you to the next level. So Martin, those are the 14 we went to. They're like, well, so most of them are pretty good. Some a little dated. Some most of the time, I think we need to adapt. Remember, our goal is to persuade people how they want to be persuaded. So that brings us to our Persuasion IQ question of the day. Here it is. So I'll give you a couple questions here. Question number 1, During a negotiation, should you make the first offer? True, false, or it depends? Second question is, when you come into a negotiation with a high number, you must make sure it is A, justifiable, B, the second offer on the table, C, overwhelming, D, 200% more or less than expected, E, your final offer. So let's tackle the multiple choice one first. When you come to a negotiation with a high number, you need to make sure, number one, regardless of timing, we don't want it to be overwhelming. The answer is A, it has to be justifiable. There has to be a way for them to know you didn't pull that number out of the air. They have to know there's a standard for you to arrive at your offer. Even though it's really high or really low, they have to feel that it's justifiable. This is where we get our number. Here's our formula. Here's our standard. Here are the comps. This is where the number comes from. It needs to be justifiable because if you hit the insult zone, it sounds like you're pulling it out of the air. It's not going to be persuasive. And another thing we know here, that when it's an odd numbers are always more persuasive than even numbers. For example, $107,403 is always more persuasive than just $100,000 straight up. Even though it's more money, it's an odd number and it sounds like you've done the math. It needs to be justifiable. So let's talk about the other one, the first offer. It is okay to make the first offer. Now, many negotiation trainers will teach you this is wrong. Now, the studies show the person who makes the first offer. Now, this is assuming you've done your research. They create the starting point of the negotiation. They create what's called an anchor, and the studies show they get better terms. So not only do you get better terms, you get to dictate the starting point or anchor point of the negotiation, but also it builds likability and builds trust. Because everyone's been to the same school, we don't make the first offer, don't make the first offer. Nobody goes, everyone's holding their cards tight, there's no trust, they don't get anywhere. Now, if you don't know what the number is, if you haven't done your research, if you have no idea what they're going to say, if you have no idea about the industry, don't go first. But I'm assuming you know what's going on, you've done your research, go first, you're going to get better terms, build trust, and have a more successful negotiation. Now, of course, you want that number, as we talked about, to be justifiable, to be as high as low as possible without getting in that insult zone. We don't want you to make it look like you pulled it out of thin air. Has to be, again, a formula, a policy, a standard practice, whatever it is. Especially in a negotiation where there's some tension, maybe there's some past history, they don't trust you, they're going to assume the worst about you and your motives. So that's another time to go first, to show them you're open, maybe offer a concession, go first. Not only to build trust and likability, you get to dictate the starting point of the negotiation, which I'm telling you, the studies show you statistically will get better terms. In fact, a famous Harvard study involved giving some executives insider information about one company's plans to acquire another. The executives are randomly assigned to role play the part of either the buyer or the seller. What they didn't know that the information given to each side was identical. Both sides had the same insider information. After analyzing the information, the executives each had to give their private assessment of the company's fair value. Now, it wasn't surprising that the executives who played the part of the seller gave values that were more than double those offered by those who were playing the role of buyers. The interesting thing, the results were driven by what would best serve the party in their randomly assigned roles. So just know, in any negotiation, it is expected that each side brings their biases to the table. And you might not know all these biases, and you can't let them take you off guard. One of the key factors is to put yourself in their shoes. Why are they thinking that? Why are they saying that? What information do they need? Because even in a role play, people take on the role and they try to get the best for themselves. So when you can show empathy, when you can be friendly, like we talked about today, when you can go first, any of those things helps out the negotiation process because they're automatically assuming, especially if there's history, you're out to get them, you're going to attack them. Even in mock situations, people aren't going to divulge all the information they should. They're trying to get the best for themselves. And if you could open yourselves up, show them you're trying to get this win-win, then that changes the game. And one way to do that is to go first. It's okay to go first as long as you've done your research, you know the numbers. Remember, it builds trust and creates the anchor or starting point of that negotiation. Just want to share that with you because that's counterintuitive for a lot of people. I'm telling you, if you think they're biased, they think you're biased. You're not being friendly, they're not going to be friendly. They're not going to go first. You're not going to go first, back and forth. Hey, that just builds on each other, and eventually it's a downward spiral, and nothing happens in that persuasion and negotiation. So thanks, everybody, for your kind emails and your feedback. Seems like we talked about a lot of content today, but hey, take something. Is it going first? Is it likability? Or are you letting other people persuade for you when they shouldn't be? Take something, one thing that you learned today, apply it, use it, make it part of you. And that way, you become more influential, you're changing the world, you're making more money, you're being more successful, and you'll have the ability to go out and persuade with power.